My name is Jairo Morales, and I have worked as a conservation ranger at the Llanos del Orinoco Wetlands Reserve in Colombia for more than 17 years. I've seen many things over that time, from the steady return of bird species to the struggle of jaguars on the periphery, but nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened during the early months of 2023. That was the year the crocodiles came back. Now, when I say crocodiles, I'm not talking about the common spectacled caimans you see lounging near lagoons or the Orinoco black caiman we occasionally track in the deeper backwaters. I'm talking about Crocodilis intermedius, the Orinoco crocodile, the largest predator in South America and one of the most critically endangered reptiles on Earth. These creatures, once apex rulers of these rivers, had become ghosts in their own homeland. By the early 2000s, the Orinoco crocodile was practically extinct in the wild, hunted to the edge for their skin and displaced by human expansion. The only ones left were tucked away in breeding programs or scattered in isolated, nearly unreachable river stretches, mere fragments of a once mighty population. We never expected to see them again in the Llanos, not naturally. So when the report first came in, it didn't seem real. It was a hot morning in February when the call came from one of our junior monitoring team members, Andres Rojas. He was conducting routine drone surveillance over Laguna de Tinayas, a semi-remote wetland that's hard to reach without a boat and a machete. That area is known for an abundance of capybaras, jabiru storks, and a few anacondas. But what Andres saw from the air made him stop recording mid-flight. "I think there's a croc here," he radioed in. "Caiman?" I asked, assuming he'd spotted a caiman basking on the bank. "No," he said, and I could hear the edge of his voice sharpen. "This one's huge, and it's got a broader snout. I think it might be intermedius." At first, we all assumed he was mistaken. After all, we've had false alarms before. Misidentification isn't rare, especially when working from a low-resolution thermal image or squinting through morning glare. But the footage Andres brought back made every one of us go quiet. There it was. Lying half-submerged in the mud was a creature at least 4 meters long, with the distinctive V-shaped snout of Crocodilis intermedius, and a light grayish-green hue unlike the darker caimans we were used to. We watched the video again and again in the reserve office that day, comparing the footage with archived material from the 1980s, the last time a wild Orinoco crocodile was seen in this area. We had to confirm it. The next morning, I joined Andres and biologist Dr. Sofia Restrepo on a 12-hour trip upriver and through knee-deep marshes to get to Laguna de Tinayas. The sun beat down hard as we pushed our skiff through the reeds. Birds scattered. The water shimmered with algae, and dragonflies danced over our heads. I knew this swamp like the lines of my own palm, but that day, it felt unfamiliar, like it was holding its breath. When we arrived at the lagoon, we set up our hide. Hours passed. The heat turned thick. But then, around midday, it emerged. It was her. She rose from the muddy edge of the water like something out of time, massive, regal, and unmistakably intermedius. Her tail slid out behind her in slow, careful movements. Her eyes scanned the shoreline. We held our breath and snapped photos, videos, anything we could to document what we were seeing. I remember whispering to Sophia, "We're not hallucinating, are we?" She just stared, shaking her head, barely able to speak. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind was racing. If this was real, and every sign pointed to the fact that it was, then something extraordinary was happening. But the real miracle came 3 weeks later, when our field team returned to the same spot with camera traps and soil testers. She was still there, but this time, she wasn't alone. We found the nest. Buried just above the high water mark, under a pile of sand and leaf litter, were signs of recent digging. Tracks encircled the area. We moved carefully, meticulously documenting without disturbing a thing. And then, under a protective drift of reeds, we saw the unmistakable evidence of at least one clutch of eggs. The Orinoco crocodile had nested, here, in our reserve, for the first time in decades. We didn't know what to feel first. Joy? Disbelief? Terror of what could go wrong? All of it hit us at once. Sophia cried openly. I stood there with my hands shaking. It was like finding a species that belonged to the past, when we thought we had failed, had chosen to return on its own terms. Over the following months, our work changed. We started around-the-clock monitoring of the site. We adjusted patrol schedules, installed remote cameras, and restricted all human access within a 2-kilometer radius. Even our own team was only allowed in short, carefully coordinated shifts. We contacted the Ministry of Environment, and within days, specialists from all over the country began arriving: herpetologists, ecologists, even veterinarians from the Orinoco crocodile breeding program in Puerto Carreño. Everyone wanted to see it with their own eyes. Most of them had never seen any Orinoco croc in the wild before. The mother, whom we had now named La Vieja, continued to patrol the area, fiercely protective and surprisingly tolerant of our cameras. She fed at dawn and dusk, mainly on fish and the occasional unlucky capybara, and rested near her nesting mound throughout the day. But it wasn't just her. Over the weeks that followed, we confirmed sightings of 2 other adults, one male, significantly larger than La Vieja, and another subadult female, likely 3 meters long. Whether these individuals had been released from captive breeding programs and had dispersed, or whether they were remnants of a hidden population we had somehow missed, was the subject of heated debate. All we knew for certain was that the Orinoco crocodile was back, not just visiting, but nesting, claiming territory, acting as if this was still their domain. Word spread. By April, the global conservation community had its eyes on our little reserve. The IUCN sent a delegation. Journalists from Bogotá and even abroad started requesting interviews. We turned most of them away. This was too fragile, too sacred. The crocodiles didn't need headlines, they needed peace. There were threats, of course. Locals, especially some of the ranchers bordering the wetland, were less than thrilled. Rumors began to spread that the crocodiles would eat their livestock, that their children were at risk, that this was all part of a government plan to limit grazing rights. We held public meetings, showed the footage, shared the science. We listened. Some people changed their minds. Others didn't. A few even threatened to shoot the crocodiles on sight if they came near their land. It was a delicate balance. But for every skeptic, there were 3 people who cared. And slowly, word by word, the narrative began to shift, from fear to awe, from anger to pride. And then, on the stormy morning of June 2nd, we heard the first hatchling cry. I'll tell you more about that in the second part. But for now, let me leave you with this. When I joined this reserve, my job was mostly about loss. We counted what was gone. We measured decline. We fought to protect the pieces left behind. But in that moment, standing in a downpour, watching life claw its way out of the sand, I realized I was witnessing something far more powerful than any loss. I was witnessing a return. The storm hit hard that night. It had been building for days, the kind of humid pressure that makes the trees tremble and the air feel heavy even in the early hours. We'd been monitoring the nesting site for over 70 days by then, counting each one like a held breath. We knew the timing was close. Orinoco crocodile eggs typically hatch between 70 and 90 days depending on environmental conditions. We were nearing the window, and the rains had arrived just in time. On the morning of June 2nd, thunder rolled over the savanna and the sky split open. We had just finished checking one of the outer camera traps when Sophia's voice crackled through the walkie, "Se están moviendo." They're moving. We dropped everything and ran, slipping through mud, dodging roots, splashing into waist-deep water, toward the nesting site at the northern edge of Laguna de Tinayas. By the time we arrived, Sophia was already crouched near the camera, pointing at the ground. I knelt beside her. There, through the pouring rain and layers of damp earth, the nest was stirring. Tiny mounds rose and fell as if the soil itself was breathing. Then we heard it, a sound that no camera could ever fully capture. A high-pitched, rhythmic series of chirps, faint but distinct, coming from under the earth. It was the call of hatchlings. Orinoco crocodile babies begin calling from inside the egg, triggering the mother's instincts to open the nest. And right on cue, from the reeds at the edge of the lagoon, La Vieja approached. She moved with astonishing calm for an animal of her size, stopping just short of the mound. For a few moments she stayed still, eyes fixed on the shifting sand, as if confirming what she was hearing. Then, in a slow, practiced motion, she began to dig. We watched in silence as the massive female scraped away the topsoil with her snout and forelimbs, gently uncovering the clutch. The first hatchling emerged moments later, small, slick, and striped with yellow, like a living relic of some forgotten era. It blinked into the storm. One by one, more appeared, fragile yet full of instinct, scrambling into the world under the protection of a 300-kilogram mother who hadn't left this spot for weeks. When she had gathered enough of them in her jaws, gently, as crocodiles do, she turned and moved them to the water. We counted 17 that day. 17 critically endangered Orinoco crocodile hatchlings, born in the wild, raised in the arms of nature, not science or cages. No release program, no soft handover. This was survival, raw and ancient and real. We cried again, not ashamed of it. After years of tracking species in decline, seeing this happen, naturally, successfully, was something I can only describe as sacred. We documented everything: temperature, nest depth, rainfall, pH of the water nearby. But all of that was just science catching up to wonder. Over the next 48 hours, more hatchlings emerged. By the end of the week, we had counted a total of 28. Sophia believed this was likely the full clutch. Most crocs lay between 20 and 40 eggs, and some may never hatch. But 28 was more than we dared to hope for. Of course, hatching was only the beginning. Survival was another matter. The Llanos is full of predators: caimans, birds of prey, jaguars, even large fish like the Piraiba catfish. In their first few weeks of life, crocodile hatchlings face nearly 90% mortality rates in the wild. That statistic haunted us, and we debated how much to intervene. We ultimately decided to keep our hands off. These were wild animals in a protected zone. Our goal was to protect the habitat, not raise crocodiles in tanks. Instead, we increased drone surveillance, adjusted buffer zones, and tracked Vieja's movements daily to ensure no human interference. She was an exemplary mother, constantly moving her brood between shallow pools and shelter zones, keeping them hidden under vegetation, her eyes scanning for threats. For weeks, we caught glimpses of the babies trailing behind her, chirping, mimicking her movements, learning. The story started to ripple outward. Our report was submitted to the IUCN Specialist Group. It became official: the first documented successful wild nesting of Crocodilis intermedius in Llanos del Orinoco in over 4 decades. Colombian news outlets ran the story. Then international ones picked it up. NGOs began contacting us. It became a symbol of hope. But with attention came new challenges. Poaching, once a thing of the past, reared its head again, not for skin, this time, but for collectors. A report came in that someone had attempted to steal hatchlings from another known crocodile site further north. That rattled us. We doubled security, installed motion sensor alarms near tinayas, and coordinated with environmental police. We also began local outreach, holding talks at nearby schools, meeting with ranchers, even bringing them to the reserve to see the footage. One of the biggest turning points came when Don Ernesto, a landowner in his 60s and once a vocal critic of the reserve, joined us for a night patrol. We showed him the footage of La Vieja digging her nest. He stayed quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I saw one of these once, when I was a child. Thought I'd never see them again." A week later, he erected a handmade sign at the edge of his property: Zona protegida, no molestar cocodrilos. Protected zone, do not disturb crocodiles. There were setbacks, of course. One hatchling was found dead, likely taken by a caiman. Another disappeared without a trace. Nature is not sentimental, but most of them, somehow, were thriving. By August, 21 of the original 28 had been observed still alive, healthy, growing, more independent. Some were starting to venture slightly farther from the mother, learning to hunt small fish and insects on their own. The rainy season helped. So did La Vieja's unwavering protection. In September, something we didn't expect happened. Another nesting mound was discovered, this time 4 kilometers from Tinayas, near the Rio Matir. This wasn't La Vieja. This was a new female, untagged, unknown to us. She was also nesting. That's when we knew, this wasn't a fluke. This was a population, however small, beginning to recover. A few weeks later, the Ministry of Environment declared the entire northern corridor of Llanos del Orinoco a critical priority zone for Orinoco crocodile conservation. New funding was secured. Additional staff were hired. A long-awaited protected migration corridor project was greenlit to connect Tinayas with other wetlands across the Meta and Casanare departments. The mood at the reserve changed. We weren't just protecting land anymore, we were helping to rebuild a legacy. It's been over a year now since those first hatchlings emerged. Some of them are now nearly a meter long. Their yellow stripes are fading. They're learning to disappear into the murky water, just like their ancestors did for millennia. I still patrol the lagoon every morning. I still walk the bank where La Vieja built her nest. Sometimes I catch her resting near the water's edge. She doesn't flinch when I pass anymore. I think, in her own way, she trusts us now. And in that fragile bond, between an ancient predator and a few muddy-booted humans, I see the future of conservation. Not just rescue, not just protection, but return.